Hi, it's Kevin May in the PhocusWire Studio here. Delighted to be joined by Chamath Palihapitiya. We're really pleased that you've joined us. You're the CEO of Social Capital and the fairly recently installed chairman of Virgin Galactic. So I kind of wanted to talk to you about a number of things. We'll split it into two parts. One is with your new hat on, and one is with the other hat on, okay? So, I mean, Virgin Galactic as a brand and a concept has actually been around for a while. I remember seeing one of their other former executives many, many years ago talking about the concept, and there was a lot of, okay, that's really cool, but it felt like it was always going to be such a long way away. And they've had a few ups and downs, some unfortunate ones and things, but you're there now. Just give us initially, Chamath, your kind of umbrella view of where that business is and the technology and the opportunity, first of all, please.
Well, I think the opportunity is one that sort of is at the intersection of a bunch of very important trends that are happening in society as we speak. So yeah. I think that the commercialization of space travel and the ability to do space tourism was a phenomenon that I think many people thought would be real, but many decades out. Well, it's been many decades since they said that. And yeah. So I think the time is now. And over the next 20 or 30 years, I think you're going to see a lot of incredible companies push the envelope on exploration and privatize what has historically been a business that's been run by governments. And as we do that, I think what you're going to have is the creation of a completely new type of luxury experience and market. And in that, I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities up and down the stack, from the technology that's used to build these machines that are capable of sending people safely into space and back, all the way through to the travel and the accommodations and the experiences, not just for the people that are in space, but frankly for the friends and loved ones of the people on the ground watching. And so that entire ecosystem is going to develop out of nothing. Mm-hmm. So part of my interest was piqued by that, which is, sort of in this social media world that we live in that values experience more than anything else.
Yep.
It is probably, undebatably, the most unique experience in the world.
Yep.
You may be surprised to know that in the totality of humankind, meaning everyone that's ever lived or are living, of which there are about 100 billion of us, 562 people have gone to space.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's a moment whose time has come. And when you think of all of these trends, there's just going to be a lot of curiosity that's piqued. And you'll be able to satisfy that curiosity and actually buy a ticket and experience something that, frankly, basically virtually nobody has up until now.
It's what Virgin Galactic's planning to do. Is it travel or is it tourism?
Well, I think it starts at the intersection of both.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is that the experience is crafted in a way where when you buy a ticket, and it's your time to fly, you and your whole family will come to our spaceport in New Mexico. Yep. And it's an entire week-long experience. And it's programmed around becoming an astronaut. And it's run by the person who was in charge of astronaut training for NASA. Mm-hmm. And so in that respect, it's very much tourism. And there will be, over time, luxury experiences, more affordable experiences for your children, experiences for your family and friends, experiences for you, fine dining, all of those things that you would expect for something like this. But then there's clearly also a travel component, which is that you are training to enter space.
Yes.
And
which is no small undertaking.
It's no small undertaking from a technology perspective. As it turns out, for the individual itself, the company has designed a product that is accessible to basically virtually any human being from, sort of 18 to 80. And we only say 18 because, there's a legal requirement to be 18. But the point is that in the absence of a meaningful health condition, your ability to tolerate the G forces that are required to send you up to space typically exist within most humans.
Right, okay. Would it also be a logical step for it to become a transportation brand as well?
In fact,
in terms of, it's not just sending people up to space, but it's also sending them incredibly quickly to Sydney from London.
In fact, so if I take my hat off as an engineer and put my hat on as the investor, what I'll tell you is that in order to build something that can send people to space and back, what you are really doing is validating a bunch of very difficult technical concepts. And when we start commercial operations, we will be the only company in the world who will be flying paid passengers at hypersonic speeds. Now, when you think back to the last company that tried to do it supersonically, it was the Concorde. That flight profile was nominally very similar to a traditional airplane. It operated roughly in the same altitude. It only would go supersonic. So supersonic means just slightly above Mach 1. Hypersonic means anything 3.5 or greater. It would only do that over the oceans because of all of the sonic boom and whatnot. But this is a product that could theoretically ferry passengers across any 2 points in the world at roughly, less than 1/5 of the time of a traditional airplane. So if you think of a Los Angeles to Shanghai flight, which is typically 12 hours, or Los Angeles to Hong Kong, 13 hours, it becomes under 2 hours. And I think when you think about that world, and again, that world will be 5 to 10 years away, but it's not 50 years away. But in that world, what happens is you completely start to reevaluate the whole concept of travel and leisure. You would never think, we're in Miami right now, you would never think that you could go to Hong Kong for the weekend. Or you would never think that, if you were in, San Francisco, that you could go to London for the weekend. But if you could get there in 90 minutes, it's no different sometimes than driving from one tip of San Francisco to the other in traffic. And so that's completely transformational to the world of travel and tourism and transportation.
Do you think it has, or potentially will have, almost a kind of an image issue, because it's been leveled before that it is essentially a rich person's kind of plaything? It's ultra luxury in terms of cost and things like that. Is there something that you feel that you would need to get over to make it more, I don't know, something to people to aspire to almost? Because it is expensive to do, right? It's
incredibly expensive to do. It has required, more than $1 billion of invested capital and 17 years of time. So it's not only expensive to do, it takes an incredibly long amount of time to do it safely. Now, contrast that, though, that $1 billion with what NASA has spent. So NASA, in 60 years, to send 500 odd people to space, have roughly spent almost $600 billion. So about $1 billion per person. Now, we are able to get that cost down into the hundreds of thousands per person. I think it stands to reason that over the next 10 or 15 years, our goal should be to get the cost into the tens of thousands. And naturally, what will happen is it will unlock markets and make it much more accessible. I mean, if you asked Richard or myself, I don't think the goal is to sit there and charge hundreds of thousands a ticket over time. The goal is to democratize the opportunity for many people to travel this way. But it is just important to realize that it's an incredibly complicated, expensive, time-consuming effort. And so we start small in a market that we know exists and prove quality and prove value, and then slowly and methodically work our way to broaden the market. And technology companies have done that quite well. And when you invent things for the first time, you really need a group of ardent believers to support you.
And we've champions had that. Of it.
You need champions. Tesla is a very good example, which when it started, it was selling a very expensive Roadster. Now, 17 years on, it's able to sell a $30,000 car that's driving the electrification and pioneering our perspective on climate change and carbon emissions for autos. Well, that took some time, but they did the right thing. And they moved down the cost curve. And as shall we when we have the opportunity.
Society's not known for its patience, though. I think that's perhaps the issue, isn't it? If you're having to wait 17 years for Tesla and things like that.
I don't know. I would push back only because I think that Tesla has, basically seen a 54-fold increase in the value of their business.
Yeah.
And so I think it is the opposite. I think when people see real value, real technical differentiation and product differentiation, they're exceedingly patient.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks on Virgin Galactic. Let's move to the other side of things. So correct me if I'm wrong, you've been fairly outspoken about conscious bias, which is something that we've,
Sure.
and in venture capital and funding. I mean, how serious a problem does that remain? Because there has been some sense of change in the last couple of years because of certain issues in the media and things like that. Do you think we can pretty much kind of banish the bro-grammar culture, which I think travel's had some fairly high-profile issues around that?
I think we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, what is the goal? Mm-hmm. I think the goal of technology should be to democratize opportunity. Mm-hmm. And what that means to me is that anybody, anywhere, should be able to step in and build something that is incrementally better than something before it, without a lot of impediments in their way that are artificial. The impediments in their way should be their intellect,
Yep.
should be product quality, should be customer love, should be NPS, all the typical things that go into finding a legion of customers who believe in you and love you. What probably is not necessary, we would all agree, is that if in order to build a superior product, what you need to do is mimic and look like the person that controls the money to give it to you, that's an unnecessary tax that society pays to frankly be better. And we live in a world today where you can effectively abstract away those biases. How would you do it? Well, you brought up travel. When you look at sort of the travel industry, in large part why travel has been such a leader in its ability to transform itself online is because it operates in a world where, for example, a lot of value can be gotten from a company like Google.
Yep.
And we can all debate Google bad or good for travel. But the point is that, Google is need blind. And if you have a better product and if you have a superior mechanism of engaging with customers, they'll allow you to get your product in front of those customers. Now, over time, they take a tax and the tax goes up and profitability decays. Right. But you would say that a lot of those people probably would not have been business people, entrepreneurs, had they been forced to go through the traditional funnel of standing in line in a venture capital firm, asking for money. Okay. And so travel is a great example of what can happen in its early days when you have more meritocracy. Now, can and should they get better? Of course, we all need to. But there are many, many other categories of innovation that have not actually advanced nearly as much, where there are these little cabals of folks who can dominate and pioneer things that touch all of us, whether you see it, feel it, and touch it or not. And I've been a big believer that the best thing that I can do to become great at my craft is work on my inherent bias.
Okay.
And try to be able to close my eyes and not require this person to mimic or look like who I am or what I'm used to, and instead ask the core questions that get down to, will this person be able to build customer love and NPS and product market fit? And what you find is that person comes in an incredibly diverse set of costumes. And so, being a really good investor is really about being able to take off the superficial labels that they bring to a meeting and seeing what's underneath. It's really hard.
It is really hard, yeah, indeed. So you've also said debt-laden companies could be, a trigger for a next kind of a financial problem. Travel is, again, has many companies that are saddled with lots of debt. I mean, give us your kind of perspective on how that. I mean, it's difficult to get rid of debt. So,
well, I think the world moves in pendulums, and our attention spans are the shortest they've ever been because of social media and the like. And so we forget the historical context in which we live. And the reality is that the world, humans, anthropologically, tend to move and back between extremes. And, we have lived in a world of sort of capitalism gone amok. And what that really means, practically speaking, is, when we were all looking over the brink of an abyss 10 years ago, the world collectively decided that the only way to save itself was through a, sort of perverted form of trickle-down economics. Mm-hmm. And so central banks made money free. Unfortunately, the first part of the bet worked, which is assets got completely inflated and rich people were able to buy things. But the second part never happened, which is that they bought things that were unproductive assets.
Right.
They weren't buying factories and hiring people. They were buying pieces of art and airplanes and depreciating assets and, and things that didn't help. So what's happening? After 40 years of lower rates and after 10 years of essentially free money, we've woken up. And so I think what will happen is the pendulum will slowly start to swing the other way. And you're seeing it. I think populism is a reaction to it. You see it in Britain, you see it in America, you see it in a lot of countries all around the world. Without judging it for a second, just take it for what it is, which is a reaction to this hyper-capitalism, asset inflation gone amok. You're seeing things like wealth taxes being proposed. And what these things will do, whether you like it or not, some form of this stuff will essentially allow us to delever. Because it will force people who hold unproductive assets to sell them.
Yep.
If I own art and I have to spend 6% a year to keep that piece of art, instead what I will do is I will sell that piece of art because now it's too much of a tax for me to bear, and I will put that money into something productive that yields me enough money to pay those taxes every year. And that will have a profoundly better and more impactful way of touching folks all the way in the economic strata. So what will happen is all these debt-laden companies will very quickly have to realize that this is beginning. And over a 10-year cycle, 15-year cycle, you're going to see a lot more bankruptcies, a lot more delinquencies, a lot more debt go bad. And the companies that win will be the companies that focus on free cash flow and profitability, and just run their business prudently, hire people, pay them fairly, pay them well, in fact, and just go about their day.
Lastly, I'm very conscious of the time. We could chat for hours, I'm sure. What else do you think is on your radar? I mean, we've spoken a lot about because of the Virgin Galactic thing, but what else is kind of on your radar? And the second part to that question is, do you think this industry is kind of courage and complexity is something that we've heard you speak about before. Do you think this industry is courageous enough to take on issues that are really complex beyond Virgin Galactic type elements?
Let me give you maybe what seems like a completely philosophical answer that may make me sound crazy, but I think the biggest problem facing society is just the one that of individual reckoning around people's own happiness. And I know that sounds abstract, but I just think that we've gotten to a world that has idolized everybody else's definition of success. And we're about to hit this wall. And you can already see young people hit this brick wall. Levels of depression, levels of anxiety, levels of suicide, and these things are compounding at rates that are disturbing. And frankly, as the adults in the room, we should be ashamed of ourselves. And so I think what people are longing for, even though they may not realize it and they may not have the words to ask for it, are ways of reconnecting with individuals that allow them to feel their humanity and help them redefine success in ways that are more balanced for them. And so in that, I actually think there's something really important about things like travel, because it exposes you to other people. In some ways, like...
And it's an aspirational product. It's inherently aspirational, would you say?
I think it can be. I think that it's much more basic than that, which is that it's about human connection. And I think it allows people to bridge differences in unexpected ways. So, social media has been powerful in some really positive ways. Let me give you a negative way. It has basically allowed people in California to realize that they and people in Mississippi are completely different people. Or people in Washington State and people in Louisiana are completely different. And when media was slower and it wasn't real time, nobody interacted with each other. When media is in real time and microsecond and millisecond, what happens is you very quickly see how people are different, and instinctively you recoil and you reject. travel has this interesting property where when you're physically in touch versus virtually in touch, you're actually much more open, receptive. And you see that by the people who travel the world.
Yeah.
And when you unlock experiences, you smell it, you feel it, you're much more empathetic and open to different viewpoints and different worldviews. And so it has an incredibly important role to play in what I think is the next great crisis. So the next great crisis is not a financial crisis, it's an emotional crisis. And I've been, for better or for worse, an architect of building those when I was at Facebook. But I think that that's the next great reckoning that we have to deal with. And Virgin is a way for me to help play my part. I think the idea that if people could, eventually see a world where you can travel anywhere in the world in under, 90 minutes for the same amount that it would cost you to buy an economy class ticket. I don't know when that'll happen, but imagine you could do it. You'd maybe read an article about a place and you could be there 3 hours later.
Yeah.
I just think that that's incredible.
Yeah.
The idea of that is just incredible.
Yeah.
And that people who had completely specific views, you could get them to a place and actually see that their views were right, wrong, or much more in the middle.
Yeah.
And I think that has a profound value to humanity.
Okay, a very optimistic message, I must say. It's great. Thank you so much for talking to us. Chamath Palihapitiya, thank you, Veng. Thank you.
Thanks.